Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Alternative Residence and Citizenship by Investment. I'm Mike Delgass, Managing Director and a Financial Advisor here at Wellspire, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. For those of you who don't already know Wellspire, we are a national independent advisory firm with practices that include institutional and personal wealth management. Our advisors focusing on the personal wealth management bring a deep commitment to delivering thoughtful, personalized financial guidance with an unusually strong focus on sophisticated planning, which I think will be in focus today. So Wellspire is a fiduciary, and our team is made up of advisors that bring a wide range of expertise to help clients navigate complex financial decisions with clarity and confidence. We're really excited to dive into today's topic, which is really being driven by unprecedented interest and inquiries directly from our clients. These demands have led us to create more opportunities to offshore assets, creating jurisdictional diversification, and to seek experts in the field of investment migration, creating citizenship and residency diversification. Our goal today is to provide answers to the questions that they've been asking about how our American citizen clients can acquire alternative citizenships and/or residencies. And for that, we are particularly pleased to have the perfect guest for this conversation. Judi Galst joins us from Henley Partners. Henley is really the premier firm in this area, having written a lot of the legislation we'll be discussing today. And Judi is a managing director for the private clients group there, and the head of Henley's New York team. So Judi, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Me too. So we'll keep this pretty informal. I'm going to be our clients and be the questioner, but we'll have a few slides here along the way, but we're going to give people, I think, an approachable view of some of these complex topics. So Judi, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and Henley?
Sure. So as you said, I'm a managing director of private clients for Henley Partners, and we are an advisory firm. Sounds like we're a law firm, but we're actually an advisory firm. And we specialize in helping people get alternative residence and citizenship by investment. We can also help with citizenship by ancestry. And in my role, I kind of wear two hats. One is I work directly with clients. I understand what their objectives are, and then I can make a recommendation for them on a strategy that will help them accomplish that. And if they decide, yes, a program or more than one program that we talked about makes sense for them, then Henley offers full service support throughout the entire process. The other hat I wear is really to work with firms like Wellspire as an extension of your advisory services. I know you have lots of clients that are curious about this topic, and so I'm sort of an expert consultant to be able to help you out when that comes up.
Okay, great. And you've been very helpful already, but we'll talk more about that. Now, I've heard you use the term investment migration. What does that mean exactly in more practical terms?
Very good question, since it's the topic for today. So we should all understand what it is.
Right.
So there are many countries in the world, probably about 100 countries, that have laws that say if an individual or a family makes some form of an investment in the country, they will either grant them residency rights or citizenship. And this whole concept actually started over 30 years ago with the small island nation of St. Kitts. They were trying to figure out how do they generate foreign direct investment.
Mm-hmm.
And they came up with this concept that we have a strong passport, we have a beautiful place that people could spend time here. Let's allow them to become citizens by making some form of a contribution to our country. But today, it's not just poor nations that are relying on this foreign direct investment and that have programs that allow for people to have a path to residency or citizenship. 26 European Union member states provide the right to reside in return for making an investment, and all 19 sovereign countries in the G20 offer a mechanism to encourage inward investment in exchange for residency rights.
Okay, so interesting. I had no idea it was that many countries, honestly, that offered some kind of a program. So there are a lot of options for us to discuss. We won't focus on all of them today, just the most interesting, the most common ones. So What are you seeing now among US clients? What are the trends this year?
So it's interesting. If you had asked me 5 years ago, what are the trends I'm seeing among US clients, I would have said nothing because it was
Right,
not US
right,
clients that were doing this.
right.
Our firm has been in business for 25 years, and it really wasn't until 2020 that we had any interest in alternative residence or citizenship from Americans. It was emerging markets. It was
Hmm.
people who came from countries that had weak passports. What does a weak passport mean? It means it's really hard for them to travel. They always have to get a visa in order to enter countries. And so a strategy would be for them to obtain a residence or a citizenship to a country that gave them access and greater mobility. They also were not from countries that taxed on worldwide wealth like us lucky
Hmm.
Americans. And so this could also be part of a tax strategy. They were more inclined to relocate either for tax benefits or to have a better life, access to better education or healthcare. And we still have lots of clients from emerging markets. We have 70 offices around the world. But in 2020, nobody wants to remember this, but there was the pandemic. And if you remember, the US passport was blocked, meaning many countries closed their borders to us. Our passport at the US passport is quite strong. We can go to over like 180 countries without a visa. And during the period of the pandemic, for at least a year, that dropped down to 61 countries.
Hmm.
And here we were, we could work remotely. People wanted to go to that vacation house that they had in Italy or land their private plane in some island, and they couldn't. And that was really the first surge of interest coming from the United States. And Henley and Partners didn't even have an office here. We were servicing that business out of Canada. I'm actually their first US employee, and I started 3 years ago. So I think the firm thought, like, after the pandemic, the interest coming from the United States would die down, but in fact, it hasn't. Um, we now have more American clients than any nationality. So the demand to understand alternative residence and citizenship among US citizens is really staggering. You can hear my voice is a little scratchy, and it literally is because I'm on calls all
Okay.
day with
Yeah.
people. Look at my, Outlook calendar, and it's like blue, 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 blue. So there's significant interest. Now, people are not relocating. I know you read a lot of headlines that say Americans leaving the country. The 99% of my clients have no intention of leaving the country. This is really an insurance policy.
Right.
But these things, as you'll learn as we start to talk about some of these programs, they don't process immediately. So for anyone that wants to have some form of an option at some point in the future, it's really good to understand what's out there and how long might it take for me to get to that point.
And I think we'll get into this later, but there are some countries that are very long process and some that are relatively straightforward. In the past, we've done you do
Hmm.
one application over here, you do one over there.
Yeah. So
Now,
definitely people do some things in parallel.
but I want to rewind us back just a little bit because I think this distinction is really important and sometimes maybe misunderstood. Can you distinguish for us really clearly between alternative residence and alternative
Hmm.
citizenship and what that means?
Yep, absolutely. And when I do a consultation with clients, this is like one of the first things that I
Mhm.
talk to them about because it's important to understand which path is going to satisfy what they're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't make one better than the other, they're just different. So when I say someone has legal residence in a country, it doesn't mean they have a house there. It means they have the ability to live unlimited in that country for some period of time. So, as I said, US passport, very strong. We can go to a lot of countries without getting a visa, but we can't stay there forever. Most significantly, if you want to go into Europe, most of us know you can go in for 90 days, then you have to leave for 90 days, and then you can go back in for another 90 days. So if you were to gain legal residence in a country like Greece or Italy or Portugal or Malta, you could live there 12 months a year, but it's not permanent.
Mhm.
It usually comes with conditions or requirements to maintain it. That could be if you pursued it via an investment that you can't liquidate the investment. So, Italy, you can gain legal residence if you buy 500,000 euros of Italian stock. If you sell your stock, you will not be able to renew your permit. Similarly, in Greece, via real estate, you sell the real estate, you're going to lose the permit. But it does give you the right to live in the country. In some cases, it allows you to work. In other, some countries will say you can work, but only remotely, not for a company that's actually in our country. Um, and it can often have a path to citizenship. So, what is citizenship? How is citizenship different? Citizenship is a lifelong right. It's really difficult to take away someone's citizenship. And when you become a citizen, you get a passport. And as a holder of that passport, you gain travel rights. So, as I said, United States, we can go into 185 countries with our US passport. You become a citizen of another country, you gain the rights that those citizens have to travel on that passport. Where citizenship is incredibly powerful is in Europe, because if you become a citizen of one country in the European Union, you gain the right to live and work and have benefits in any country in the EU.
So I want to come back to that because that is, I think, the biggest question we get from clients is how can I get EU citizenship? Um, but before we do that, the live and work and the pass down to future generations on the citizenship side, I think kind of highlights the interest in legacy
hmm
potentially for why people might do this. But what are the other reasons that people look at this in the first place, especially for US citizens?
Sure. So, I mean, the one that you've just mentioned, protecting generational legacy and opportunity, is definitely a key driver. I mean, I've had clients that have said to me, like, they only want a program that they know will pass down to their grandchildren. And like,
Mhm.
they don't even have grandchildren yet. But they're thinking about a changing world that we live in and wanting to make sure that they are protecting opportunity, not just for themselves, but for their children and future generations. Honestly, 90% of the calls that I have today start out exactly the same way. The people say to me, I can't believe I'm having this conversation. Like, I
Right.
love living in the United States. I
Mhm.
don't want to leave the United States, but I feel really unsettled. And, they may have had relatives that, fled the Holocaust in their DNA. They may be part of a marginalized group that worry about protections that
Mhm.
could be taken from them at some point. Or they could just be, wealthy people that have the ability to mitigate risk by creating options. And in a time where you're trying to mitigate risk and you can afford it, they want to understand what they can do. So I would say plan B is clearly, something that comes up in almost every call.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think in the current environment, there's a temptation to put a political lens on everything because we're getting more polarized, et cetera. But I wanted to emphasize your point also that, given enough dollars, in a family's wealth plan, this is insurance, right? It is, as you said, a
Totally.
plan B that doesn't, you don't expect to need it, you don't want to need it, but it's there if you need it.
I think again, this whole PTSD that a lot of us have from the pandemic, where we realize there's some risk to having one mobility option,
Mhm.
also is a factor. If you have a residence in Europe, you can travel to that country even if the US passport is blocked, and you also have Schengen access if you have residency in another Schengen country. If you have another passport like the Caribbean, you can travel to 150 countries on that passport. So you don't have the risk of one passport, which could, for some unforeseen reason, lose its strength. And finally, I would say diversification of assets. And you alluded to this a little bit in the beginning of the conversation that clients
Mhm.
that you're talking to are asking about diversifying their mobility. But a lot of those same clients are saying, I'm not sure I want to leave all my money in the United States. I'm not sure I want to have all my real estate in the United States right now. How can I diversify my assets? And what I do in some respects checks that box because to qualify for the vast majority of these programs, you're moving assets. New Zealand permanent residence, you're moving 3 million euros, dollars there for a period of time. Um, in Portugal, 500,000 in venture capital, private equity. In the Caribbean, you're investing in real estate. So it does check the diversification of asset box to some extent. I do realize that many clients are not thinking in those terms. They're thinking, I want to maybe have a Swiss bank account or a bank account in another country, which in some cases is part of the process. I mean, in order for me to buy
Right.
500,000 euros of stock for someone in Italy, I'm opening an Italian bank account. In order to do the Portugal Golden Visa, you're opening a Portuguese bank account. But I'm sure you're going to have clients, or already have clients that are asking about opening Swiss accounts and those kinds of things, which is another hot topic these days.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I would observe that um, the investment options that come along with many of these programs um, are really tailored to create benefit for the hosting country
hmm
and not necessarily to maximize return
hmm
for
Yep.
the investor and new
Yep.
citizen or new resident. So
Yep.
I take your point. It is you're getting assets out of a particular jurisdiction into another, but that may be in a suboptimal way sometimes, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
something
You
you
just want
manage
to
around.
get
And
back
yeah,
what you put in
yeah,
and have the
yeah,
benefit of the residence and the citizenship.
yeah.
I'm right there with you for
Yeah,
sure.
return of capital is
Yeah,
great. If you get a return on capital, that'll just be a happy surprise. Yeah.
yeah. When a client calls me and says, I want to invest to get a passport, I'm like, the investment is getting the passport. That's your real payoff. Getting the residence is your real payoff. And then anything that you can get financially from the investment is got to be thought of secondarily.
Right, right. So let's turn to some of the places, some of the most popular places to talk about and what their different aspects are. Can you tell us
Sure.
about the usual suspects?
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk from a perspective of what Americans are doing.
Hmm.
As I said, we have 70 offices around the world. What our clients in South Africa and China and India are interested in is going to be different. In fact, we have lots of people that are coming to the United States with the EB-5 program, and they can't wait for this gold card if this is going to get released because they want to come and build their life here in the United States. But for Americans, I would say there are a handful of countries that I talk a lot about with clients. And the first one is actually the Caribbean. And people might wonder, why would someone want to become a citizen of a Caribbean country? But first of all, it's very fast. It's very affordable, relatively speaking. Um, and it's a citizenship. And if you remember, I talked about the
Hmm.
difference between residence and citizenship. And there are not a lot of ways to become a citizen of another country, to get another mobility option, to get a lifelong right. Right now, the Caribbean passports do allow you to enter into Europe for 90 days out of 180 days. I say right now only because Europe has been threatening to take that away from the Caribbean. So it is
Hmm.
possible that we're going to see a weakening of that passport. I don't know, but it is certainly something that if you Google, you will see about that. The Caribbean has 5 countries that offer citizenship. It's Antigua, Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, Grenada, and St. Lucia. I do a lot of Antigua, Barbuda, and St. Kitts and Nevis, and I'll tell you why. They're all priced the same.
Hmm.
So Dominica has a weaker passport. I do a little bit of Grenada. They don't have many real estate options, and many people want to invest in real estate because there's a way to recoup your investment that way. And St. Lucia takes extremely long time for processing right now. So sometimes you'll find other countries that are taking a long time, but I try to give my clients the fastest turnaround that I can. You can live in any of the countries with one passport. So you could get St. Kitts and live in Antigua. St. Kitts is processing the fastest right now. You can either make a contribution of $250,000 per family or invest in real estate at a slightly higher amount of 325,000. Now, when I say per family, this is actually a really important thing that comes up when I have a
Yeah.
consultation with clients. I need to understand the family. I need to understand the ages of the children because that can be a huge factor in determining what program is going to make sense for someone or not be as costly for them. In the Caribbean, you can, with Antigua and Barbuda, have children up to age 31. They have to be under age 31 that are no longer financially dependent on the parents on one application, one investment. So it can be really affordable for people that have kids that are in their later 20s, even if they're out working. Many other programs do not allow children above the age of 21 to be on the parent's investment. And so you then get into the situation where you have to do multiple applications to cover everybody that you want to have. Um, St. Kitts does allow children up to age 30, although right now they want some level of financial dependency. But I did have a discussion with the head of St. Kitts last week in London, and I told him they should change that. So we'll see if that changes. Um,
Okay.
when you invest in real estate, what are you getting for 325,000? And not a villa. You are getting probably a share of a villa. But you do have a full deed, so it's a little different than a timeshare.
Hmm.
And for example, in St. Kitts, you can get 12 days usage at the Royal St. Kitts Villas. In Antigua, there's some great villa projects where you'll get 8 weeks for the minimum amount. And you have to hold it for a certain period of time. It can either be investment, generating rental income for you, or for personal use. And then Antigua, you can sell after 5 years. St. Kitts, you can sell after 7 years. There are even developers that'll do a guaranteed buyback for you, so you don't have to worry about getting rid of it, although at a
Yeah.
slightly less level than what you invested. So I do a lot of Caribbean. It's great for multi-generational families. So mom and dad have 3 adult kids, and each of them are married with 3 kids of their own. So we need 4 applications. We could 300,000 each into one villa for 1.2 million, and then they have a whole villa for themselves, which can either be an
Mhm.
investment property or for personal use, and then they can sell it. So it's a great fit for large extended families. After Caribbean, I would say let's go to Europe. And in Europe, we have the two strategies, residency or citizenship. And there are a lot more options for residency than there are for citizenship.
Mhm.
From a residency perspective, the four most popular programs that I do are Portugal, Greece, Italy, and Malta. Why are they popular? Um, One, I mean, I think people could see themselves spending time there and enjoying it. But two, they don't require you to spend much time there in order to maintain the ability to live there potentially for 12 months a year. So Malta, Greece, and Italy say after you come for biometrics and pick up your residence card, you never have to come back again until you need to renew. In Greece, you renew in 5 years. In Italy, you renew in 2 years. Then you renew after another 3 years. And in Malta, you become a permanent resident. Um, Portugal does require a minimal amount of time, which is 14 days every 2 years or 7 days a year. But it's still not requiring you to be there an extensive amount of time in order to have the ability to live there. So for those looking for the plan B, fits well.
Right.
Um, Portugal has been particularly popular because if you remember when I talked about the residency, I said they could have a path to citizenship, but usually it's a pretty arduous path. So Italy says you want to be a citizen and start as a resident, you have to live in our country for 6 months a year for 10 years.
Mhm.
And Greece says 6 months a year for 7 years. And Malta, if you start just as a resident, you're never becoming a citizen. Portugal says still only 14 days every 2 years. So a lot of people that had the end goal of getting this EU passport with this great freedom to be able to live anywhere in Europe, they went towards the Portugal Golden Visa.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that created a tremendous backlog. And my clients right now are waiting a really long time to get the Portugal Golden Visa after they submit. Some are waiting almost 3 to 4 years. So for people that want something in place right away, Portugal is not a great option. We did see a significant development 2 weeks ago. Clients started getting called for biometric appointments. I had clients that had applied 2.5 years ago that are finally being called for biometrics, but clients that also applied 3 months ago are called for biometrics. So it seems to suggest that they're getting their act together with regard to biometrics.
Oh,
So people
okay.
may be getting their Portugal Golden visas a little faster. But in parallel with these improvements of issuing time in Portugal, um, we've seen Parliament pass a law that says people need to be residents longer if they want to become a citizen. So right now, Portugal law says you could apply for citizenship after 5 years of being a resident. Still takes another 2.5 years to get approved, but
Mhm.
5 years is really not that much, especially if you only had to be there 14 days every 2 years. But Parliament has said it should be longer. It should be 10 years. And they passed a law saying that, which is on the president's desk. And he's either going to sign it, veto it, or send it to the Constitutional Court. But it looks like the path to EU citizenship from Portugal is going to be longer than it has been historically.
It doesn't Portugal have a language requirement also, or am
Yes.
I misremembering that?
Yes. So any country that allows you to apply for citizenship will require you to pass a language test and a
Yeah.
culture test. So yes to Portugal, and same for Italy and Greece. They would require you to do that if you were applying for citizenship. I have some asterisks next to Malta
Okay.
because I want to talk a little bit about a direct route to citizenship, and we're just going to dive into the U.S. ones. Um, with Malta, I want to give a little historical perspective. So, Malta used to have a citizenship by investment program. It told people do A, B, and C. A was make a huge contribution to the Maltese economy. B, rent a property. C, spend 21 days in Malta, and you would get citizenship in 14 to 16 months. And the European Union hated this. They said it was transactional. They were selling a passport. They were granting citizenship. They gave access to all these countries to people that didn't show any tie to the country. And they sued Malta in 2022. And in 2025, just April of this year, the High Court, going against what the EU Advocate General said legally they had a right to do, deemed the program illegal. And they essentially killed the entire concept of citizenship by investment in Europe. There will be no more citizenship by investment programs that are direct to citizenship in Europe for any member of the EU and probably for any country that wants to join the EU because of that decision.
Mhm.
But what countries are doing is they are now still creating a pathway to citizenship, but they're basing it on a provision in their constitution that says they have discretionary ability to grant citizenship to exceptional people that make an exceptional contribution. It's known as citizenship by merit. And we've actually helped some clients get citizenship by merit in Austria. It's a very expensive endeavor. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details because the main applicant is essentially making a contribution of about 4 million euros. And the spouse has to speak German and children have to be under 17. So we're not going to talk a lot about it. But Malta is doing something similar at a more palatable amount, but it's not nothing. And there's tons of interest in this because there are so many exceptional people that are wealthy that can afford to do it. So the first step for Malta citizenship by merit is you need to be exceptional. But they have a lot of interesting categories for what makes someone exceptional. You could be very philanthropic. You can be an entrepreneur. You can be an investor. You could also be exceptional in science or sports or other more traditional categories of exceptionalism. Once we kind of determine that the client would qualify, their next step is they become a resident in Malta, which involves leasing or purchasing a property. And the family then will come for biometrics and become a resident. So immediately you have a plan B, immediately you have the ability to live in Malta. And then we are working on a proposal with the client. We are identifying many, many different projects in Malta that will contribute to improvements in the lives of Maltese or people of the world because we're doing things with regard to cleaning oceans, literacy, medical research, sports, um, finance. There's all sorts of very, very interesting projects that are being developed. And we will identify projects that align with a narrative that works with the client, what they're interested in, what they've done in their life. And they will make a sizable gift to this project, probably around €1 million per family. Children up to age 29 can be included on a parent's application, so it becomes really appealing for people that want to create this
Mm.
generational legacy that we talked about. So they want their kids to have the freedom to be able to live in 27 countries in the European Union, to work in other places in other parts of the world. So one big part is this contribution to this project. The next part is there has to be a continual tie to Malta because if you remember, I just said EU sued. They said they were granting citizenship to people that did not show a tie to the country. And so the main applicant is going to have continued ties to Malta. It doesn't mean you have to spend significant time in Malta, but you're going to have to spend some time there. And the way you can show ties is going to be vast. I mean, people with family offices could have a small office there. I have a film person who might open a small distribution office there. I have people that are going to teach courses. I have people sitting on advisory boards. There's so many different things. I mean, we want to work with the client. We want them to be excited and interested in what they're doing so that they can feel comfortable about having this continual tie. And there'll be a period of sort of compliance. The passport is going to be issued in about 12 to 15 months from beginning to end. But for
Mhm.
5 years, we will have to probably present a letter on behalf of the client as to how they've had continual ties. And that period will probably terminate it after 5 years. So that would
So
be the path to EU citizenship.
yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. A couple things I want to ask and probe a bit more about, but I want to also draw attention to your word narrative, because one of the things I've been struck by is the way you build a story around that exceptionalism and how
Hmm.
that ties to a particular activity that you're going to do in Malta. And also the way that using some of the examples you gave, how if you think about this in advance, when you are, for example, if you're planning an international expansion of a business platform or something, if you're also thinking about this planning at the same time, you can marry those together and maybe
Absolutely.
make them work together in a more seamless way. Um,
Absolutely.
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I can move on to some other programs, but
Well,
I didn't know if you
I
had some more questions.
well, you were talking about the language requirement
Hmm.
across most of the EU's residency programs, and just, this may be obvious to everybody who can get to Wikipedia, but Malta language requirements. Yes, you've got to be able to speak one of the official
Official languages.
languages, but English is one of those,
Yes.
right?
So for our clients that are interested from India or China, wherever, they're going to have to learn English if they don't know it already. I mean, it's more of a international language, so it's probably not the same hurdle for people having to learn Portuguese. But
Mhm.
for us Americans, that's one less thing we have to do if we want to do Malta by merit.
Right, right. So, um, maybe next is New Zealand. Is
New
that where you
Zealand,
were headed?
I'm really into New Zealand.
Okay.
Um, I think it's like a great fit for a high net worth family, for a number of reasons, albeit it's far away. But, when I have conversations with people, they want a plan B in a place where they could see their children growing up and having a typical life, an English speaking country where there's good healthcare, there's good education, there's job opportunities. And New Zealand really checks those boxes. I mean, when I talk about the Caribbean, people are like, yeah, we could run there for a short period of time. And it also could be like a great place to spend time with family, in a less doomsday scenario. But they really don't want to be raising their families in the
Hmm.
Caribbean. They want to find a place where they feel like they could have a good quality of life. And unlike Malta, this is purely investment driven. So you do have to move, a fair amount of money there. It's 3 million US dollars, and it has to be invested for 3 years in active investments like private equity, venture capital, or private credit. So it's conceivable that you're not extracting your money after 3 years, depending upon the portfolio that you design,
Right.
because some of those products may not have an exit strategy after 3 years. But the physical presence requirements and the application process are quite easy. Um, we do work with the client to gather certain personal information. One of the most important things is we have to demonstrate where we're going to nominate the funds so that we can show it's not laundered money. And everyone does need to get a medical exam and a chest x-ray with a New Zealand doctor, which there's not that many of them in the United States, can be a little bit annoying. Um, but we can submit a client usually 4 weeks after we start working with them, and they will have preliminary approval in about 4 weeks. So this
Wow.
is fast. Once you get preliminary approval, you then have 6 months to move your funds to New Zealand. And as soon as your funds arrive in New Zealand, your ability to live unlimited in New Zealand begins. However, you have a limited requirement to spend time there. Everyone has to enter New Zealand for 1 day within the first year. And then the main applicant, could be either husband or wife, has to spend a total of 21 days there in that 3 year period. At the end of the 3 years, from an immigration perspective, New Zealand doesn't care if you extract your money. Again, you might have invested in things where you can't pull your money out quite
Right.
yet. But we go and we say the money's been here for 3 years, and we say the main applicant did the 21 days, everyone else entered for 1 day. And by the way, children under the age of 25 can be included on a parent's investment as long as they are single and not working full time, or they have to still be financially dependent. Some of our kids work and are still financially
Right.
dependent.
Yeah.
Um, I've been in that, but before. Um, so uh, they can liquidate their money, they become a permanent resident, and they have the right to live unlimited in New Zealand for the rest of their lives, but they never have to go back again. So it's a lifelong right. It's potentially generational, depending upon the age of your kids. And
But it is residency and not
it,
citizenship, correct?
correct, you're not getting a passport.
So
Um,
if I
if
were worried about my grandchildren, um, because I don't have grandchildren right now, they wouldn't have that right. Is that right?
Right, unless your children ultimately moved to New Zealand and the grandchildren were born there.
Right.
So yes. Um, Interestingly, permanent residents of New Zealand have almost exactly the same rights as a citizen. You don't have the passport, so I acknowledge that is a difference. And I have clients that do Caribbean and New Zealand because they want
Hmm.
another passport, but they really wouldn't. want to live their lives in the Caribbean. Um, you could vote if you live in New Zealand, not if you're a permanent resident living in the United States, you can't vote. But if you do relocate there, you have access to
Mm.
healthcare, to education. Um, you can't compete in the Olympics for New Zealand. You can't have a high security job and you cannot run for parliament. But other than that, you basically can do whatever a citizen does. And there are many people that live as permanent residents in New Zealand for 20, 30 years.
This may be beyond what you're willing to talk about or know about off the cuff, but would this would Australia um, kind of would New Zealand residency give me access to Australia?
No, but the other way around does. So
Okay.
if you become a permanent resident of Australia, you can actually live in New Zealand. The thing is, it's not so easy to become a permanent resident of Australia. They no longer have an investment migration program. What they do have is a talent visa. And I have actually done half a dozen talent visas because, I mean, they're probably clients of yours that are famous in Hollywood or athletes or entertainers. I have songwriters that have done it. I've had people in private equity that have qualified for this because they are involved in an area that is of interest
Hmm.
to a sector in Australia. So here's how it works. We would review the resume of the person. We like tell 80% of the people they're not going to get it. But for those that we feel would qualify for an Australia talent visa, um, they likely will get invited to apply for this visa. And there's no cost to it. There's a nominal cost for our fee to get a sponsor for them and to pull the profile together. But they want young talent. That's the other thing. If you're over age 55, it becomes more difficult to get invited for this visa. I do have a client, Hollywood client, who is over 55 and he was invited for the visa. So it's not a non-starter, but it can be much more difficult. The difference between Australia, as I describe it, and New Zealand is it is not a lifelong right. It is a visa that is granted to you for 5 years. And if you don't contribute to Australian society, which would probably involve spending some time in the country and making difference, creating jobs or doing something, it's not getting renewed. And your kids will ultimately roll off depending upon what age they are. So kids up to 18 are included in the initial visa, and they can remain included up to age 23, provided they're still financially dependent. But it's not like that same lifelong right that New Zealand gives you.
Okay, so just to summarize a bit and kind of remind us all, Caribbean countries that you mentioned, Antigua being one of the faster ones, it sounds like we're talking about kind of hundreds of thousands in terms of investment, which can be real estate, very little to no residency requirement. Do I have that
Okay,
right?
interesting question.
Okay.
So today, yes. However, I am literally
Okay.
expecting any day for a residency requirement to be introduced for the Caribbean. What I believe it's going to look like is you will be granted the passport and granted citizenship, and your passport will be good for 5 years. But they will not renew it unless you've spent 30 days over those 5 years in the country
And you think
total.
that'll be kind of universal across
Yeah,
Caribbean nations?
I
Okay.
do. And the reason for that is that these are strong passports, and there is pressure from the UK and Europe on who's getting them. And what this residency requirement is going to do is going to make it much more difficult for people from the Middle East and Africa and other countries to just get these passports. They used to be able to get them and never step foot in
Hmm.
the country. So and the residency might change a little bit, but this is the I've heard like maybe 30 days collectively. So like if it's mom, dad, and three kids, like together,
Oh,
like
okay.
but again, it's not been published yet, but it's coming soon. Um, Now, you're not going to lose your citizenship in 5 years, but you're going to have an expired passport, and they're not going to renew your passport until you
I
fulfill
see.
it.
So you have to come down, kind of be there for a while, and then you might be able to renew your passport
Yeah, as long
after.
as
Yeah.
you're going to have to meet that physical presence requirement.
Right, right, right. Um, okay. And in terms of taxation there, that doesn't attract worldwide taxation, in the Caribbean, just because I'm a Caribbean citizen, right? Or a
Yeah.
Antiguan or
So
yeah.
let's just talk in general. I mean, not even just Caribbean, because this is something that people often really worry about because
Hmm.
you're always paying your US tax. And so people worry, like, if I become a citizen of another country, do I have to pay tax double tax or resident of another country. And first of all, I'm not licensed to give tax advice, so I'm going to talk at a very high level here. But you don't become a tax resident just by becoming a resident, legal resident, or a citizen of another country. Typically, becoming a tax resident is only triggered when you spend substantial time in the country. It's usually 183 days a year. However, there's some examples, like in New Zealand, it's 183 days in a 12-month period, not in a calendar year. And Switzerland, it's after 90 days. So what I would say to my clients that ask me about taxes is, if you are intending to spend significant time in another country, we have to do a local tax consultation, and that is part
Yeah.
of our service. But the fear of double taxation is not um, usually relevant based on how most people are choosing to use this strategy. In the Caribbean, you really don't have to worry about it because they have like no tax.
Right. And well, and so, I think Americans in particular can kind of be tricked or kind of not realize that this is less of an issue because they assume every country is like the United States. But in fact, the United States is pretty unusual in the way
Yes.
we tax worldwide income and tax a worldwide estate.
Yeah. And
So it,
also, yeah, even if you do live in another country for 183 days, I mean, there are all these tax treaties. It doesn't mean that it's
right,
going to be bad for you. I mean, it may be that you are going to pay tax in that country and it's going to deduct against your US tax. For example, like, and there may be very favorable things, like there's a transitional tax in New Zealand. So for 4 years, they're not even taxing on your worldwide income.
right, right.
But these are things that like tax experts need to dive into, and they need to look at the client situation and how it could impact any level for estate planning or anything like that.
Right. And this maybe is one reason why Portugal is so attractive compared to things like Italy, Spain, Greece,
Exactly. Yes.
because you can have a tax there. Sometimes there's an estate tax, depending on which country you're talking about, on the local holdings and that kind of stuff. So Portugal's relatively good, I think, from a tax
Well, what's
perspective.
good about the golden visa, which is the direction I thought you were going in, is
Hmm.
that there's a path to citizenship that does not get you close to becoming a tax resident because they're saying
Oh,
only
that too. Yeah,
14
no,
days
that's a good point.
every
Yeah.
2 years, whereas the other countries are saying 6 months, meaning you must be a tax
E-
resident in Italy
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah,
You
that's
must
not
be a tax
next then.
resident in Greece.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's a great point. Um, yeah, and that's a that's an important overarching point to make too, I think, is that the things we've been talking about are places that have very limited residency requirements. That's very intentional because that's what our clients want most of the time. But if
Hmm.
you actually want to go and live for long periods of time in a European country, there are other options to talk about. But usually those are people who say, I have a place in Italy and I want to be there. Show me how to make that happen and make it the most tax efficient way possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a client they got like they did taxes in Florida. They like left New York and they went to Florida, but they wanted to be there in the summer. So they
Hmm.
got Italian residency and they're going to do 4 or 5 months in Italy. They're not going to become a tax resident,
Uh-huh.
but they're going to still be able to spend like consecutively, not worry about this 90, 180-day thing in Italy, which is where they feel would be like a really great place to complement their life in Florida.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I talk to some clients too that are planning for their retirement. I mean, it's not all doomsday. And they're thinking like we've always wanted to spend time in another part of the world. And so that's the strategy is guided by what their vision is for this next stage of their lives.
Right, right. So we go from Caribbean to Portugal in terms of the total amount we have kind of invested, and we're still talking about hundreds of thousands of
Mhm.
dollars. Then we go to Malta, and we've kind of reached the $1 million mark, and we've got a
That's a gift.
yeah, yeah, and that's right. That's not an investment.
Yeah. At this
That's a
stage, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then we go to New Zealand, which is a few $1 million now,
Yep.
right? 3 million. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that maybe that's a good spectrum. I know there's more information on your website also with a nice chart on a few of these things as well.
Yep.
So, people can refer to the Henley and Partners if you want more detail on a few of these. Um, I want to kind of circle back to a few kind of overarching questions and maybe misconceptions that people have. And this came through our Q&A function also, so I know it's a question other people have right now. And Do you have to give up your U.S. citizenship to do any of these? Or are we
No,
okay?
no one renounces, especially anybody with money,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they get it with an exit tax that you would not ever want to pay.
And
So
and it's a
the U.S. does
brutally
not limit.
long
Yeah,
like it the process of expatriation in the United States isn't just the exit tax, it's also going through a whole process that has its own costs and
yeah.
stuff. So
The
it
the U.S. does not limit the number of passports you can have or residences. I literally have clients that get an ABC plan. They're having like multiple options.
yeah, yeah. Okay. I isn't there one exception with Austria there where you have to be careful about
Uh,
the order of in which you get things?
yes, Mike is listening in all of our consultations here. Austria says you could have as many citizenships as you want, but once you get Austria, you need our permission to get another one.
Okay.
And then there are also some countries that don't recognize dual citizenship with the US, like Spain. So, I mean, there are considerations that you have to have, but in terms of the US restricting you, that's not something that one has to worry about.
Got it. Got it. So you do not have to renounce your U.S. citizenship to get another passport. And by the way, residency is not a citizenship. So if all you're looking at is residency, like in Portugal or New Zealand, that's not really an issue anyway.
Correct.
Um, so a couple other questions. You mentioned Spain, Judy. Um, we got a question asking about whether Spain's program was terminated and whether that was still a viable option or not.
Yeah, the Spain Golden Visa was closed April 3rd. The program used to allow one to gain residence by making an investment in real estate. They have a housing crisis there. They blame the Golden Visa for rising housing prices, and the program was closed. There's some routes in Spain, but they require you to live there. So, like a retirement visa or elective residence visa. So, not good options there. The way to live in Spain is Malta. Get a Maltese passport, then you can move to Spain.
Yeah, unless you really are trying to live, full time in Spain, essentially. I mean, there are avenues
Yes,
there if you're willing to, you know,
exactly.
get through those hurdles. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's you made this point before, but maybe we'll just emphasize it that, again, what we're talking about are kind of the easier things for people who are not really intending to move full time to a different place. If you're seeking to do that, that's kind of a whole different question that,
Yes.
and there are other pros and cons when you're
Yeah,
when you're
I mean,
thinking
they're
about that.
digital nomad visas. You can get hired and sponsored by a company. And I'm guessing there's probably some question about what about Canada and the UK. So I might as well just like very quickly address
Please,
those,
yeah, great.
because people always would like to move to Canada or the UK, and it's really, really difficult. They both used to have investment migration programs, and in 2022, it was discovered that like thousands of Russian oligarchs had taken advantage of the program, and this was like when the war was breaking out. It was a very bad PR look, and they shut the programs. So right now, it is extremely difficult to be able to relocate to the UK. They have a talent visa. That's how you read Ellen DeGeneres has moved to the UK.
Mhm.
But the common person, very difficult. You have to be sponsored by a company and then work there and relocate there, or start an innovative business where you could maybe not relocate, but you still have to spend a fair amount of time and you have to start a business there. And Canada also, Montreal does have an investment migration program, but you have to be fluent in French. You have to live in Montreal for at least the first 8 months after application. And there's also like a startup visa. They give 100 people get it a year. Both of those require you to relocate in order to be able to renew it. So not good options there at the moment.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned digital nomad visas, and we have a specific question on that. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Just a little bit because I don't do them, but
Okay, all right, fair enough.
digital nomad visas are usually pretty cheap. They're good for a year. They are for people that want to live, you're expected to live in the country and work remotely.
So if you're going to do that in a particular country, worth more inquiry, but
Yeah, not all
hard to
countries have them,
generalize.
but more and more do.
Yeah. Um, so we also got a question about the language requirement. I think we mostly kind of hit on that, but maybe if you could review like the places that have language requirements and when you do have that language
Sure.
requirement.
So a language requirement is going to come into play for a citizenship application. So
Hmm.
if you're just getting residency, there's not a language requirement. If you want to become a citizen of Italy at the point of applying for citizenship 10 years after living in Italy for at least 6 months a year for 10 years, you would have to pass like a language test and a culture test. And same for Greece. Portugal, if they extend 10 years when you can apply, you will have a golden visa for the first 5 years, and then you apply for permanent residence for the next five
Hmm.
years, and you must pass the language test before you become a permanent resident. So that's actually like pre-applying for citizenship, but there's some advantages to applying for permanent residency rather than staying a golden visa holder, and that is that you can liquidate your investment. So language, Caribbean, there's no language. I mean, it's English.
Yeah.
Malta, like English is the language. So think in terms mostly like if you are starting as a resident and you ultimately want to become a citizen, that you're going to have that requirement.
And I've heard the Portuguese requirement as kind of an advanced beginner kind of thing. And I thought also there were some official classes that you could take to pass the language requirement if
Yeah.
that's how you wanted to do it.
So that was like a new thing that came out a couple years ago. It is an elementary level test in Portugal. And they said for people that were like scared of taking the test, okay, you don't have to take a test. You have to take 150 hours of Portuguese language school. But
Hmm.
that might also be going away. I'm not
Mm.
sure. That might be part of the new parliamentary law. So stay tuned on that.
Okay. So, I mean, what I'm gathering is that things change, right?
Yes,
So, yes.
yes,
So
things change in this
we,
business.
yeah, we have to keep our ears to the ground and keep discussing. Um, so we've got some pretty specific requirements about people's individual kind of situation. And I think I'm going to kind of put a pin in those and maybe we can go to them
Yeah, you give my email or
specifically. Yeah. Um, so, question about Malta. Yeah, if someone's application for multi-citizenship was approved by the government before the EU Court of Justice, ruled that this was illegal, is there still a hope to get the passport or not?
okay, yes.
Okay.
First of all, if you got the passport through the prior program that was deemed illegal, the passport is fine.
Okay.
Um, we have over 150 clients that are stuck in the program that has been closed. They are all being worked through. They will ultimately get through. They're all being assigned projects, and instead of making a gift to the Maltese economy, which was one of the requirements of the prior program, there's going to be a project and a proposal, and they're going to sort of pick up with this new merit pathway.
Got it. Got it. So just if it was in the pipeline, it may be delayed, but there's still a chance that
Yeah,
that
they're
this
working
works.
in order. So the people that were the closest to the end zone are
Hmm.
being dealt with first, and moving backwards because there were people at various stages of the program when it unexpectedly closed.
So we have a few questions about the why. That is, why would you want to do this? What are the red flags I should be looking for, essentially? Um, and I don't know if that's a fair question to ask you. I guess I would. I'm interested in your thoughts. I guess I would say that that depends, right? It depends on each person's family history, kind of their I I have clients that are interested in doing this that have very particular family trauma that they're
Hmm.
responding to, and they hear the echoes of that trauma
Hmm.
in some of the conversations today. Again, I'm not making any judgments about whether that's right or wrong or what, but for them it's a real thing, and Plan B is not a bad option. Do you have things you
Right.
want to add there, Judy?
Well, two things. One is what you're referring to. We didn't really talk about citizenship by ancestry, but that is also something that certain people can qualify for. And I personally am doing citizenship for Germany because my family fled the Holocaust. And um, Germany and Austria have laws that if your family fled the Holocaust, that you and all future generations are entitled to citizenship. And I guess being in the business that I'm in, I'm like, why not? I mean, this is a great opportunity for my kids.
Right.
They could work in Europe or not. but like uh, I'm gonna get it. Like what I would say is why? Why? Because options is power.
Yeah.
You don't have to exercise them. But I think in any life situation, if you have options, it's a good thing. And that really is the bottom line why most people are interested in learning more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you mentioned citizenship by ancestry, and I didn't ask you a lot about that, so because I wanted to focus on a few other things. But is there a difference between a citizenship, a passport I get through ancestry, and a passport I get through investment?
Yeah, there's no difference. Not all countries have it.
Hmm.
We could refer to lawyers. We essentially will do an assessment for the client in conjunction with lawyers because it's very complex. Like people call me, they're like, I did 23andMe and I'm like 1/10. Well, I'm like, forget it. Um, there's so many
Right.
different rules depending upon the countries and different documents that you need to have. But if you're eligible, I mean, I have people that are literally probably 1.5 million out of pocket for Malta. And if you could get Germany by paying, a very nominal legal fee, you're getting the same result. You're getting EU passport. So I always ask clients, no matter how much money they have, I want to know if there's a path through ancestry. They may still decide investment's going to be faster, or it may turn out they really don't qualify. They think they did, but they don't.
Yeah.
But I always ask, I always think it's important to understand if that could be a route for them because in the end, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Um, so again, very particular to each client's history, and it may or may not match up with their desires. But just looking at a few other questions here, you spoke a little bit about, retirement in terms of getting the right visa, the right residency. Other things you'd like to add about retiring abroad and what considerations to think of there?
Again, I think if you actually are thinking about spending substantial time in a particular country, you have to be aware of taxes and it has to be looked at. But other than that, no. Know that you can't legally live in many countries for that long of a time, and you need to figure out a way to be able to do it. I mean, I've had people call me like, "Oh, my client just bought like a chateau in France, and they think they're going for 6 months." I'm like, let's figure out how to make that possible."
Right,
Like,
right, right. And maybe also we now need to have some French planning in part of your broader estate plan and wealth management plan because France doesn't respect trust the same way. You can't
oh, France, you
disinherit
absolutely,
children,
you
and
need French tax consultation.
yeah,
You could get in big trouble if you don't. I mean, even if you're buying real estate, like you may not even want to buy it in your name, or you buy it in some sort of company thing. I don't just I've
yeah,
sat on enough calls that I know there's things that need to be looked at.
yeah. We've got two last questions that I think we have time for. We've received a couple questions about dual British and US citizens. One person asked if their US passport had expired, whether they need to come back to the US to renew it if they're overseas in the UK. I'm not sure that falls in your area of expertise,
Yeah, it's kind
Judi.
of my last job. I sort of
Okay.
prior to
Yeah.
Henley.
Let's
Have them reach
let's
out to me. I have a
yeah,
contact.
that is something that needs some specific research probably just to make sure we're giving you the right answers. Another person in a similar situation that is UK, US citizenship both is asking about moving to Canada. And I think the real question there is, are the
Does the
rules
UK
in
help?
Canada different for the UK part of that?
No.
Okay. All right. So still hard, still probably not an easy layup. So lastly, there was a question about military service, and
Mm-hmm.
you
It's a good
know, I
question.
I
Mm-hmm.
would assume that this is something that we need to look at every time we're talking about somebody of service age.
Yep. I actually have a number of friends that are doing German citizenship by descent, and that was like a real fear that they had that, they had kids that could be drafted. You know, historically, if you're not living in the country, it's very difficult for you to be drafted.
Hmm.
But it is something to look at with each country. Or if they have, like I had a client that wanted to literally move to Austria and they do have conscription there, and he was within the age. So I would say that's something that should be addressed based on the family situation and what your intention is in terms of how much time you plan to spend in that country.
Okay, look, I really want to thank you for your time today. This has been great. I've enjoyed this and all of our prior conversations too, but this one especially. Thank you. You've really helped navigate these really complicated issues today, and as I said, our other clients in the past too. It's been really
My
useful for us.
pleasure.
And I want to say thanks to everybody who joined us today. Thanks for attending and for your attention. If you missed any of this, we are going to send around a replay. So this has been recorded, and we will make sure that you have that. And we also had a question about Judy's contact information. We'll make sure you have that as well. But Henley is Henley, and if you just put that into the Google machine, you will find it. And it is also right there on the in the upper corner of Judy's screen, so you can probably
Yeah,
get that as
you can
well.
email me directly. I don't charge for consultations, so we'll have a nice conversation and figure out what you want to know.
And I should say, if you have any questions on this topic and how it might fit into your own overall wealth management plan, please connect with your advisor. If you don't have a relationship with Wellspire yet, and I hope that's a yet, please feel free to put in an inquiry on our website or reach out to me or any other advisor at Wellspire directly. We'd love to talk to you and happy to help. So thanks everyone for joining us again. We really appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.